Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome. This is Inside Scoop, Virginia, and I'm Bettina Lawton, your host. And tonight we are going to be talking with two people from the General Assembly, one from the House of Delegates, and that's going to be David Toscano. David is the Democratic member from the 57th House of Delegate districts, and that's Albemarle County and Charlottesville. He is also the Democratic minority leader in the House, so we will be talking to him about some of the issues involved in being the minority leader when the Democrats are so severely outnumbered in the House of Delegates. As many people who watch politics in Virginia knows, the House of Delegates is always thought of as sort of the more rambunctious group. And the Democrats are in the minority, so I guess we can't quite have the Democrats being the ones who are causing all of the rambunctiousness that we hear about with the House of Delegates. But we're going to talk to David Toscano about that. And then we're going to be talking with Senator Barbara Favola, who is obviously from the Senate and represents parts of Arlington and Loudoun and Fairfax. But right now we are going to be bringing in David Toscano. He is coming in via Skype, so I am hopeful that everything is going to be working. And when I say, here is David Toscano will actually be there for us.
What do you say? Here I am.
It's wonderful. How are you, David? It's great to see you again.
I'm doing great. You know, I'm in the middle of a committee meeting, if you could believe that, and you were so important I had to come out here and talk to you.
Oh, I love that attitude. I love that attitude, David. Well, I gave a little intro about the House of Delegates and that we are a minority. The Democrats are a minority. We just had an election. Where does that stand? Because I know we had Marcus Simon got elected up here, but he was replacing a Democrat. And then I know Mike Futrell got elected a little further south, and I think he was replacing a Republican. So what are the numbers like? How far in the minority are we now?
Well, let's say we have got a ways to go. You know, we're at 33 right now. Well, actually, we're at 32 right now because Linwood Lewis, who was in the House of Delegates, won a Senate seat to replace Ralph Northam. So we're down one.
Right.
And we'll have a special election in the House District 100, which is on the Eastern Shore, sometime at the end of February. And we're hopeful we can take that seat. But we're still in the minority substantially, and we've got some work to do to catch up.
All right. Well, fortunately, and as I said in the intro, the House of Delegates is sort of noted as being somewhat rambunctious with some kinds of odd legislation. So we can't hang that on the Democrats. I heard at an event last night that you are actually heading or spearing up an effort on the House of Delegates floor each day to have sort of reasoned, factual kinds of conversations and speeches so that at least some of the facts on why certain legislation should get passed or not passed are getting out there, and it isn't all just sort of emotional type of floor speeches. I thought that was a great idea.
Well, really, we're working very hard to try to bring the facts to the public and to the other side of the aisle, especially on Medicaid and on Medicaid expansion. We think that that's the biggest issue of this session, and we think it benefits a great deal by exposing the facts and let people try to assimilate those facts, and hopefully they're going to make the right decision to expand Medicaid. But we've been doing these speeches every day for the last 2 weeks, and hopefully it's having an impact. It's hard to know yet because we've got a ways to go, but there are a lot of things that people need to know, and if they're not, if they don't listen the first time, maybe they'll listen if they hear it several times.
Well, I did want to talk to you about Medicaid expansion because realistically, what is the chances for that? You all set up that commission at the end of the last session, and they don't seem to want to be doing anything. And then, of course, Terry McAuliffe said, well, if you don't, I will, and that got everybody's feathers ruffled. Where does all that stand?
Well, we do have a commission that was set up in the aftermath of last session. It's called the MIRC Commission, and it's called Medicaid Innovation and Reform Commission. And it's a joint commission of the Senate and the House. It has 6 members of each body, and it's supposed to be charged with charting a way for us to take those millions of dollars in federal money, that really is our tax money, bring it back to Virginia, enact certain reforms in Medicaid, and then expand Medicaid to include between 275,000 and 400,000 Virginians who don't presently have that coverage. We think Medicaid expansion is good for jobs. It was projected that we create 30,000 new jobs if we take that federal money. We also think it's going to be very helpful for hospitals all around the Commonwealth, especially in rural areas, who stand to lose a lot of money over the next few years because of cuts in Medicare money that's coming from the federal government. I think that's one of the hidden pieces of information in this debate, is how much these hospitals are going to be affected if we don't find a Virginia way to take the money from the feds and use it here in Virginia.
Well, I did note there was a report that in your own district, the University of Virginia health system has come out and said, we really need you guys to do this for that very reason. They need to get the money. And I know hospitals around the Commonwealth have started to weigh in on this because it's an important issue for them.
Well, this is an important issue. Not only do they lose Medicare money that's coming from the federal government, but a lot of these teaching hospitals, most notably University of Virginia and VCU, or as they say, MCV in Richmond, they expend a lot of money treating people who cannot afford to pay. We call it indigent care, and we pay for it as taxpayers in our budget every year by sending millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to these teaching hospitals to care for folks who don't have insurance. A lot of those folks would come onto the Medicaid rolls if Medicaid was expanded in Virginia. And so the costs that we're expending now that are out of state dollars would be reimbursed through federal dollars. And that's where we're trying to move toward, trying to take as much burden off the Virginia taxpayer and put it on a broader group of people that would be, I guess you could call them, federal taxpayers.
Well, there seems to be sort of this basic distrust of the federal government. At least that's what I keep hearing the Republicans saying, is you can't rely on, the federal government to actually meet its obligations because they're supposed to pay 100% and then it's supposed to go to 90%. Is there any way to actually, I don't know, make them change their minds on that? How do we overcome that?
Well, I'll tell you, it is very difficult. A lot of people here in the General Assembly are very distrustful of the federal government, sometimes with good reason, sometimes for not so good reason. But they are willing to take federal money for transportation. They're willing to take federal money for schools. They're willing to take federal money for a wide variety of things. And our argument is that if you're willing to take federal money for that, why not take federal money that's really has come out of our pockets and it's gone to Washington, D.C., bring that money back here so we can use it to benefit our citizens.
No, that's a good point to make, and I'm glad that you're bringing that out so that people are paying attention to that. And it ties into something else I wanted to ask you about, because I had just read about this, and it seems to be a House of Delegates thing, of course, which is the call for a constitutional convention. I read that there is a bill in the House of Delegates for that now to try and, in theory, create some kind of spending limits or fiscal responsibility in the federal government. Is that actually going to get any traction?
Well, I think it will get some traction. And before we leave this Medicaid, let me just stress one more thing to the folks who are watching. This is not likely to be resolved until the very end of the session, and maybe not until the veto session, because the decision about whether to expand Medicaid or not will be found in the budget bill itself. So you won't ever get an up or down vote on Medicaid expansion. It'll come in the context of approving a large budget for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that won't be done until probably the 6th or 7th of March. And then it might not even be done until the reconvened session, which occurs in April, where the governor will have his say on what the budget looks like. So people should, be patient, because it's going to take a little while. But back to this constitutional amendment, there were 3 bills. I'm on the Rules Committee, and there were at least 3 bills on Friday that were heard that would have called for a convention of the states as kind of a euphemism for a new constitutional convention. What was interesting about that is that the people who supported this and the people who opposed it were both drawn from kind of the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party. You had this dispute between these 2 groups of folks. Some of them were very much into states' rights and this notion that if we have a constitutional convention, all the conservative values will hold sway and we'll have a new constitution will be more supportive of conservative values. But not all of them were. Some of them were scared to death that the liberals would take over and would take away all the so-called conservative values and all their rights. So it's not, it's not a consensus among the conservative groups about these constitutional conventions.
Well, it would seem that that would tend to limit the ability for them to get anything passed in the House of Delegates if they're not even agreeing amongst themselves. Is the Democratic caucus got a position on this, or the majority of the members, or where do the Democrats come down?
I've got to believe that the House Democratic caucus is going to vote lockstep against these constitutional conventions. I mean, I think that you really call these conventions under the founders' initiative. You only would call these for very, 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 very significant purposes. And we have some problems in our country, to be sure, but they're not going to be solved by a constitutional convention. In fact, they may just exacerbate the divisions we have in the country right now.
Yeah, I got to say I agree with you on that, and hopefully it won't go anywhere in the House of Delegates, and certainly not in the Senate, because it has to go through both, I'm assuming.
It would have to go through the Senate. I don't think it'll go through. I don't think it'll pass the Senate, and I don't think Governor McAuliffe would sign such a bill. I think he would veto those bills, and I think we could sustain his veto.
Okay. Well, we've got about 30 seconds to go, so I'm just going to tell you when we come back, I'm going to ask you about the questions. Apparently there are some bills in the House of Delegates, maybe in the Senate, that have to do with the legislators being able to go to court when the Attorney General refuses to do so. We obviously had that situation on some things with Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, and it's now come up again with Attorney General Mark Herring. But this time, instead of the Republicans thinking it's a really great idea, which they apparently thought it was okay with Cuccinelli, they are putting in legislation. So when we come back, that's what we're going to talk about, so stay with us.
Great.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries to strengthen her fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton. I'm your host of Inside Scoop Virginia, and we have with us David Toscano. He is the delegate representing Charlottesville and part of Albemarle County, and he is the Democratic minority leader in the Virginia House of Delegates. And when we left, I promised when we came back we would talk about the attempts by some legislators to give themselves the authority to intervene or file lawsuits. As I understand it, it's both in federal and state court, which is kind of an interesting concept. But David, where do those things stand? What is that about? What do you think will happen with that?
Well, the genesis of this really is the Attorney General's decision that he was not going to defend the Virginia constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage and the Virginia statute that does the same thing. As you know, a suit was filed in Virginia by two people who wanted to marry, and that suit is going through the federal court. And when the Attorney General took office, he decided he was not going to defend that suit on the part of Virginia. What the bill proposed to do was to give every single member of the General Assembly what is called standing, which is the ability to intervene and stand in the shoes of the Commonwealth to defend the Commonwealth or its laws when the Attorney General decides not to do it. And so we had a huge debate on the House floor the last couple of days. That bill has passed the House now, largely on a partisan vote. It'll head for the Senate. I do not think it'll get out of the Senate, and it certainly wouldn't get past Governor McAuliffe's pen and his veto if it got to him.
Well, that is one of the nice things from my perspective about the results of the statewide elections last year. We always had to sort of worry about if something got past the Senate, we had no way of getting it stopped reliably and having sort of reason prevail. And at least now with the Senate, we can stop some of this stuff there. We can stop it at the governor's mansion if for some reason it makes it through the Senate. So that's, I think, good. And I think it's bizarre, I'm just going to say it, bizarre that we could have, 100 people, or actually 140 people, each claiming that they get to represent everybody in Virginia. That strikes me as a little bizarre, and could create some very interesting cases.
We were speculating on some of the more conservative members of the House and some of the more liberal members of the House, both filing actions, and then they would have to purport to represent the interests of the Commonwealth. It'd be chaotic.
Right. That's just crazy.
There is a long tradition of attorney generals in Virginia deciding not to defend laws that they considered unconstitutional. Even Attorney General Cuccinelli a year ago decided he was not going to defend the statute that created the Opportunity Educational Institute, which was the centralized school board for so-called failing schools, against a lawsuit. And Attorney General Kilgore, back in 2002, chose not to defend a constitutional provision of the Virginia Constitution that was attacked by people who wanted to permit churches and religious denominations to be able to incorporate. That constitutional provision of Virginia was ultimately struck down. Kilgore was vindicated in his decision to not defend it, but nobody raised much of a stink then. Right. This is all about same-sex marriage.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Absolutely. Well, David, what are the big bills that you're interested in seeing get through? We're almost at crossover now. What's left on the table that you want to make sure folks out there know and ought to be calling their delegates or their senators if it's already passed the House and has gone over to the Senate? What are you particularly interested in?
Well, I think Medicaid expansion is really number one on the list. And of course, the more people can weigh in on that, the better. If they want to dial up their representatives and say, you ought to find a Virginia way to get these federal dollars and have them be used in Virginia to help Virginians, I think that would help. We have a large support within the Democratic caucus for this, but within the Republican caucus, especially in Northern Virginia, you have a lot of opposition. So I would hope that people would call their representatives and tell them that. Beyond that, we have a couple things that are working their way through. We've got the ethics reform bill, which is working its way through the House, and there's a separate one in the Senate. You know, my view has always been that we have to have a bipartisan approach that has real ethics reform in it. We're getting pretty close. It might not be exactly all that I would have liked, but it's going to be pretty close it's going to be good for moving the ball forward on that front. And beyond that, we've got some substantial initiatives in the area of mental health reform, both in terms of additional monies to be provided for additional beds, but also some changes in the law that I think will make it easier to help people who are in crisis and who are in need in the aftermath of the tragedy that befell Senator Deeds, my colleague and friend, someone who also represents my area of the Commonwealth.
Right. Well, on the mental health issues, I had seen reports saying that the people in the House of Delegates, a lot of the Republicans principally in the House of Delegates, were reluctant to make substantial reform, that they were sort of like, well, we don't have the money to do this and we're not going to require that extra beds be made available or do registries or do any of these kind of things. What kind of mental health legislation has gotten through the House, or if there's something in the Senate that you think might work when it comes over? Where does that really stand? Because they kept talking money and saying we don't have any money for this.
Well, I think it's interesting, Bettina. I mean, a lot of it always comes down to money, but I think there's a broad bipartisan view that we need to do something more in the area of mental health, and we're going to have to try to find the money to do it. You're right. When we say we're going to have a bed available for everyone who needs it, that costs money, and we're going to have to find that money if we're really going to do the job. If you want to detain people for longer periods of time who are in crisis, that issue is not just about money. It also goes to the how much liberty you're going to infringe upon in keeping people, especially people who are over the age of 18, detained against their will, because they are adults and they haven't done anything wrong other than to be in severe mental crisis. So you have to balance their needs and their rights against the rights and the needs of the society as a whole. So now we're playing with how many hours you can keep people without having to get a special order to extend. In the Senate, I think they're moving towards a 24-hour period of detaining. In the House, we're at 6 hours with a possible extension to 8. My guess is that we'll find something in the middle that will work and will give people a little more protection than they have at present.
Okay. Let's talk about a couple of other things. There was a lot of talk about amending the transportation bill at the end of last year. People kept saying, "Oh, this is a compromise. It's, you know, we'll fix it next year." The only thing that I've seen that came out was repealing the hybrid tax. Has anything else happened?
Not much more has happened. The hybrid tax is the only reform that we're seeing coming out of this General Assembly session. Many of us were very troubled by having that tax in the first place. We thought it penalized virtuous behavior and people buying vehicles that were designed to save gasoline, and why would you penalize them? But it was a pretty easy fix because it was only involved about $60 million, and even though it might seem like a lot of money, in the context of a $1 billion a year transportation bill, it really was very much. You are seeing some pushback against the transit initiatives in the bill from last year, but so far we've been able to hold the line against substantial efforts to water down the bill and take away money for transit that a lot of people really consider very important, especially in areas like yours and in mine that are more denser areas.
Okay. Well, let me ask you the other thing. I was at a town hall meeting actually with Delegate Markeem and Senator Chap Peterson this weekend, and someone asked a question about electric chairs. You all are reinstituting electric chairs?
Well, there is a bill that has been going through the House and the Senate, I think, that allows Virginia to have a fallback execution mode of using an electric chair instead of lethal injection. The argument that the folks are making for these bills is that it's very difficult for us to get the drugs that can be inserted so that people die, without, they just fall asleep. And given that, some of the proponents of the death penalty want to make sure you can still execute them. And so they're bringing back what they call Old Sparky, which is the electric chair. And a lot of us believe that that's really cruel and unusual punishment. I think I've voted against every expansion of the death penalty since I've been down in the House of Delegates. Not all the Democrats agree with me. There are probably about 12 or 13 in what we call the anti-death penalty caucus that refuse to vote for any expansions of the death penalty. I thought this was a little bit of an odd bill, but it has passed the House, and we'll have to see what happens in the Senate. I have no idea what Governor McAuliffe would do with a bill like that. Yeah,
this sort of came out of nowhere. I had no inkling, sort of the pre-session chatter about what was going to be going on. Certainly the electric chair was not in it, No. Absolutely.
You're right.
Well, let me ask you one other thing. We've got a couple minutes left, and that is education and school reform. I see a lot of stuff in the paper about attempts to reform the standards of learning. Is that going any place down there?
Oh, I think it is. I think there's a lot of sentiment. We need to change the standards of learning and to eliminate some of our high-stakes testing. And so I think what you're going to see is a measure that will eliminate a couple of the tests now. It's not clear which ones will be eliminated. And then a longer-term study for how we can better structure the SOLs so we don't put so much emphasis on the high-stakes testing to the neglect of the critical thinking that we need to engender among our young people if they're going to be able to compete in an increasingly global economy that's very difficult.
Well, that is something that people keep talking about, is the amount of stress we're putting, particularly the younger kids on. Not so much, I don't see it so much as high school, but the younger kids, it seems to be creating some controversy about how much testing the elementary school kids have to do. So
yeah, I think there's a broad sentiment that we need to change some things. We need to make sure that the schools are accountable for teaching our young people, because we invest a lot of money in this.
Right.
And our young people are important to the future, so we need to have some accountability standards there. But there's just too much emphasis, pressure.
Okay. Well, we are ready to go to our break. I want to thank Delegate David Toscano for coming and spending some time with us. I know he's going back to a committee meeting. They are hardworking down there in Richmond. So stay tuned, because we will be back after this break.
Thank you.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs, or to make a tax-free donation, contact cfrip at AOL.com.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America, and reading is fundamental.
We're back. Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
To Inside Scoop Virginia, I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and tonight we're going to try something different and just hope that it works, because what we're doing is a call-in from the Senate of Virginia. Senator Barbara Favola is joining us. They have meetings not only all day but also on Monday evenings, and so they can't come up, but we're going to give it a shot and see if we have Barbara Favola on the line. Are you with us, Barbara?
I am. Thank you. It is a pleasure.
Well, I'm so glad you could be here. Now, for our watchers and listeners, we are talking to Senator Barbara Favola. She represents the 31st District in the Virginia Senate, which is parts of Arlington and parts of Fairfax and parts of Loudoun County. So you've got a wide variety. You just had, and I want to talk to you a little bit about this, the reorganization of the Senate, but you've expanded the committees that you're on. So you're now on Education and Health, General Laws and Technology, Privileges and Election, and you continue on Rehabilitation and Social Services and Transportation.
That is correct, yes.
So what happened in the Senate last week? There's all these articles saying, oh my gosh, the Democrats did something nefarious and now they control the Senate.
Well, we didn't do anything nefarious. The Senate has been reorganized, and it was done very legitimately. We now have 20 Democratic senators, and the fact of the matter is 10% of the Senate, 4 new senators have come on board since we organized in 2012. And according to Madison's rules of parliamentary procedure, the minority can't hold the majority hostage. So we made an argument that, in fact, there is a new Senate now with 4 new members, and we need to revisit the rules of the Senate and proceed and reorganize accordingly. And we did very deliberately, very respectfully, and through the parliamentary procedural process where everybody knew what we were doing, everybody had an opportunity to vote on resolutions, and then we assigned the Democratic chairs to the different committees in the Senate, and we're going to proceed to govern the way our voters wanted us to govern. It's really a very exciting time. I think the Democrats will get a lot done, and I think we're gonna find support from moderate Republicans. I believe we'll make progress in the areas of mental health. We'll get some K through 12 reforms through, a real examination of the SOLs, and probably a significant scaling back of the SOLs. And I think that we'll possibly get some gun safety measures through, although I'm not so sure what will happen in the House on those measures. But, we're going to govern from the center. We're going to govern in a way that takes the state forward, that gives us the necessary safety net, the necessary investments, and yet the high quality of life our Virginians are so used to.
Well, Barbara, let me ask you, because one of the things that has been in the press a lot, of course, is the whole ethical problems that our governor had. And I know that you had an ethics bill. I think it got incorporated into someone else's. What's the status of ethics reform in the Senate?
We will get an ethics bill out of the Senate. The leadership of the Senate and many Democrats have signed on to a bill that I think is a good start. It's not as comprehensive as perhaps some of us were hoping, but it sets a $250 limit on tangible gifts. It sets up an ethics commission. It requires semi-annual reporting. It really is a very it's a very big step forward for Virginia. You have to understand that, for 400 years, there really were no requirements other than if you received a gift above $50, you had to report it. But there was, there was no limit on the gifts. There was no discussion of tangible or intangible gifts. And for the most part, that system had worked well because lawmakers were pretty deliberate about reporting gifts. Right. But the governor exercised such poor judgment in this area that it has become clear that we do need some reform.
Well, how much teeth is this ethics commission going to have? Because they have them up on the Hill, on Capitol Hill in Washington, and it doesn't seem to do much good. So,
well, I mean, they'll provide advice to lawmakers in advance, and if lawmakers are smart and they have questions, they'll go to the Ethics Commission and get a ruling. They will be empowered to monitor and do some oversight. I mean, we're expecting this commission to really, be the implementation arm of our ethics bill. So I can't tell you unequivocally what exactly the commission will do. I can only tell you what we hope the commission will do. And I think many of us are really, committed to making this work.
What about, I know you also had a bill on mental health. Where does that all stand? I know there were bunches of competing bills and everyone says...
Yes. Well, we rolled many of the bills into, out of respect to our esteemed colleague, Cree Deeds, we rolled our bills into Senator Deeds' bill. And it's very comprehensive. We extend the amount of time that an individual can be held to be evaluated. We require a registry of psychiatric beds. We ensure that if there is no local bed available for the psychiatric evaluation, that the state facility must provide a bed. And so this is a real safety net that we did not have. And it's possible that we're going to create more crises intervention centers around the state, depending on the money. So I feel very good. I feel that we're going to make some structural reform in the area of mental health, and that will really create a safety net where in the future individuals who need services are not going to be released to the community until they get those services.
Other big issue down in Richmond these days is also Medicaid expansion. So where does that stand? I know the House had that whole committee that got set up, and there's all of this, yelling around to saying that they're not going to do anything. Where is the Senate? Can the Senate actually impact whether or not we end up with Medicaid expansion?
Oh, I believe we can. I mean, there is a budget amendment put in by some Democrats and some Republicans in the Senate, myself included, supporting Medicaid expansion. And we've made it clear that we believe the Medicaid Commission on Innovation and Reform has had a chance to implement reform, and therefore we should move forward. The governor is very determined. It is one of his top priorities. More and more analysis is being done on the whole effort, and it's becoming clear that the state is losing $1 billion in savings over an 8-year period. We're losing the opportunity to create new jobs, and we're losing the opportunity to ensure many working Virginians. And I really believe that from a competitiveness argument, lawmakers will come to their senses and will move forward.
Well, the other thing I wanted to talk with you about, Barbara, is election issues. There were a lot of bills that had come out in the last year or two that most Democrats categorized as voter suppression. I know you had a bill about people age 65 and older could vote early. Where does that stand? Are all of those voter suppression bills been reintroduced again this year?
They have not, but we're going to have to wait and see. They would not pass the Senate this year because we do have a Democratic control. But it is a very sad situation where one party believes their venue to winning elections is by preventing people from voting.
Right.
I just think that's anti-democratic, and it is the wrong thing to do. So we'll have to see about these voter suppression bills, and some of them are going to be taken to court, and we'll have an opportunity to really examine how they're implemented and maybe make some changes in the next session.
Well, is there any attempt there was a lot of talk last year during the election season that perhaps if Terry won, he could, through some kind of, I don't know, executive order or something, mitigate the voter ID law that's supposed to go into effect on July 1st this year. Yeah. Is there anything going on with that, or are we going to be stuck?
I don't know. There might be some administrative options. I mean, certainly we can put money into educating voters and trying to make it as easy as possible for them to bring their identification to the polls. It is, I mean, the law is the law, so I'm not sure what exactly we could do administratively other than trying to really help voters understand what it is.
Well, is there anything in the budget to help these people who, there are folks who don't drive, there are folks who don't have identification. I know in some of the other states, they allocated millions of dollars to help these folks get photo identification. Is there anything like that going on?
No, Virginia has not been that aggressive in this area. I think those other states probably have some good models we should look at, but I cannot tell you that there'll be significant money spent on this. I don't think that's going to be the case. But having said that, Virginia has a very organized local system of registrars who really are very dedicated to their jobs and will put local resources in to making voting as easy as possible. So I think, I think we do have an infrastructure, and we need to use it.
Well, let me, in the last 40 seconds or so that we have, ask you, because you mentioned it earlier, the SOL reform. What's going on in that? What's the likelihood?
Well, there are a couple bills that, for example, Senator Miller has a bill which would remove the history SOL at the third grade level, so the children will only be tested on, language arts and reading. And he really believes that, and I agree with him, that students really have to master their reading when they're in third grade. Yes, they should learn history, but there's so many things that are just much more important at that grade level. And we can't only have the kids memorizing information for tests. We have to have them learning to think and learning their phonics and learning a skill set that's going to be with them their entire academic career. So there's a movement to look at SOLs in a way that measures progress rather than just assesses achievement at a specific level.
Okay, and I know there was also a bill that got a whole lot of press in the last week about requiring textbooks to refer to the Sea of Japan versus the East Sea. How much should the legislature really be getting into dictating this stuff?
Well, it was a very complicated question. I mean, truth be known, it's not the best path for lawmakers to go down, but I think we decided that this was a unique enough situation that if you do it in a way where the Sea of Japan and the East Sea are both mentioned, you may be able to create peace in the East Asian hemisphere. So, yeah, it was a very interesting debate. The Korean population is one of the fastest growing minority populations in Northern Virginia, and they feel very strongly about this. It was a very impassioned plea from members of the Korean community.
Well, we are pretty much out of time, but I wanted to give you the last word. If there are particular bills that you would like to have your constituents know about, or that you want people to call their delegates to try and help get it through the House of Delegates.
Thank you. Bettina, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I do want to thank the many, many law enforcement and women's groups who are supporting my Senate Bill 510, which is going to take guns away temporarily from those who've been convicted of stalking and misdemeanor sexual assault. We're hoping that this bill will, pass the Senate and pass the House, but it'll be a very tough battle. And I've gotten a lot of support from the groups I mentioned and from the gun safety groups and, Mayors for Gun Safety, Moms Against Gun Violence. All of those groups have been very helpful and wonderful in getting the bill as far as it's gotten. So if your viewers or your listeners are interested, it is Senate Bill 510.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank you, Barbara, for taking time to come on tonight. I know that you've got to run off to a caucus meeting, and I appreciate the time that you've spent with us, and I hope that we will have you back again soon.
Thank you so very much. Okay, bye-bye, Bettina.
Bye-bye.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try.
Only you.
Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about ripped off money. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, the host of Inside Scoop Virginia, and we have a special treat for the last segment of our show. We have Sheriff Stacey Kincaid. She is the newly elected, as of last November, she was sworn in at the end of November, sheriff. She's the sheriff of Fairfax City. She's the Fairfax County Sheriff. And I want to welcome Stacey for coming and being on the show tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Bettina. It's great to be here as always.
Well, I wanted to ask you, it's been about 60 days. So how has it been? You were a captain. You sort of leapfrogged up to become the sheriff with a very exciting campaign that you ran. You won decisively against 3 other male opponents. So what's it been like for the first 60 days?
It's been great. It really has been an experience and an opportunity to push forward a lot of initiatives that I wanted to do, and I think I have a lot of support. I know I have a lot of support from the rest of our staff as well.
Has anything surprised you?
You know, not really. I've been with the agency for starting my 27th year, and one thing that has surfaced is the amount of interest that has been generated throughout the county and throughout the contacts and people that I've met while I was campaigning.
Well, I did see that you were in the Washingtonian, which I thought was pretty funny. Who should you have lunch with in Virginia article, and there you were, and I was like, oh my God, I've had lunch with her. Isn't this so cool?
That was pretty cool. Yeah. I was surprised myself because I really didn't have too much of an idea what was going to be in the Washingtonian. So it was a pleasant surprise.
Well, and I do just want to say this is not a political thing to say, or not. It is a political thing to say. It is not a politic thing to say, because you were in 1 month, and the following month, Sharon Bolivar was in. So we had both of our countywide elected women officials, which was terrific.
It was a great opportunity to showcase the leadership within Fairfax County.
Excellent. So when you were running, you said you were going to try and do a couple of things. One of the things that you talked about a lot was Project Lifesaver. Now, can you explain what it is for those people who have not heard you talk about it before, and then tell us what your plans are now that you're sheriff?
Well, our Project Lifesaver program is a program which is composed of deputy sheriffs as well as volunteers that we have, civilian staff, that are responsible for our clients. Our clients consist of young folks that are autistic up through seniors who may have dementia or Alzheimer's. And we place a bracelet on them, and then they are followed through a GPS tracking system and technology should they wander away from their homes or wherever, their schools or wherever they may be.
So is this open to anybody in Fairfax County? If you have somebody in your family who wanders, is that the idea, is you can track the folks down and they don't stay lost?
Good question. Yes, it is open up to any resident in Fairfax County. Our challenge is, obviously staffing as well as equipment, because we rely on donations and fundraising in order to buy the equipment that we need for the program.
So this is all contribution based? There's no budgeted item for this?
There's nothing budgeted for our Project Lifesaver program. I have asked for a position for a Project Lifesaver coordinator because currently the program's managed by 2 full-time lieutenants that have other responsibilities. But we managed to work well with them, and of course the deputy sheriffs and the civilian staff that volunteer, we make the program work.
So you've got about 40 people. Do you know how many other folks want to be on the list but can't?
I would say at least 40 other that I know of. Once the other part is marketing this program and letting folks know that it's available, then of course that opens up the window for lots of other people. And again, to have them on a waiting list, our goal is to not have anybody on a waiting list.
Well, it is the kind of thing I would think there would be a lot of interest. I didn't know until you were running for office about this, and we certainly hear a lot in the educational realm about how many autistic children there are, and then of course with the aging of the Fairfax population, I would think I may need to get on that list. I mean,
we'll put you on now, so by the time you get there, we'll have you.
I'll be ready. Right. Oh, good. I'll be up to the #1 slot when I need to be there. That would be good. That would be good. Well, let me ask about reserve deputy sheriffs. Are they involved with Project Lifesaver? Because you had talked about redoing your reserve deputy sheriff program. How is that going forward?
We are reevaluating and reinstituting a program where we're going to only have one category of reserve deputy sheriffs. And they are going to receive the training that we're going to provide at our Public Safety Academy or in a venue that we're authorized to promote and provide training. And it's going to be opened up. We're going to have a process, and with the hopes that these folks that become part of our program are able to help us conduct battery changes and go visit, homes and of that, do what we have to do for this program.
Well, what does somebody have to be? What are the qualifications to get into the reserve deputy program? Is this you've got to have graduated from high school, and you can't be a felon, and or what are they? What do you have to do?
You have to be at least 21 years of age, a high school graduate or an equivalent of. Obviously, we do a background check, run a criminal history, and there's additional background information that is going to be conducted through our special projects coordinator. So there will be other expectations along with that as far as a commitment of time. Again, we don't ask for a whole lot of time. I believe that it's going to be about 8 hours a month. And certainly we're willing to work with folks if they're not able to make that commitment each month, but we have to have a standard in place and hold people accountable and responsible, especially since they're, you know, they're part of our family. They become part of our family, and again, we all work together.
Now,
So,
do reserve deputies get to carry guns?
not anymore. We did have a reserve deputy program. We called them Reserve Deputy 2s, and they were the retired law enforcement officers that were able to still maintain their law enforcement credentials and certification. And we've since we're now focusing on the Reserve Deputy 1s.
Okay, and when is this training program? Is the application going to be up on the sheriff's website or what? How do we do that? Because I'm going to do that. Do I get a uniform, right?
You get a uniform.
Okay.
If you pass a background check and a couple other...
I can pass a background check.
Okay.
I think.
And, but we're going to have something on our website.
Okay.
People can check our website, but also on our sheriff's page, where we will have information listed. Currently, that information has been taken down because we're re-establishing the program. Okay. So all that information will be available, and maybe when I come back to visit, it'll be something that we already have in place and people that are interested can sign up for.
Okay, and what kind of training is this? Is this something on the weekends you go to, or is it weekdays? How does that work?
We're trying to establish what the population will be and what work schedule they have. Mm-hmm. Ideally, it would be great to have it on Saturdays and Sundays, mm-hmm.
But
it's not to say that we couldn't have classes throughout the week. Okay. Maybe one night a week, maybe a 2 or 3 hour segment, and again, it would be a at least 2 or 3 month process.
Oh wow! So it is a serious commitment that people need to make to do
mm-hmm.
this. All right. Well, let me ask you something, because you've got a terrific Facebook page, Sheriff Stacey Kincaid. For those of you who have never been there, go check it out. And I saw when I was looking at it, apart from a lot of community outreach that you seem to do, mm-hmm. I saw you at Vietnamese. I guess it's Vietnamese, or maybe it was Chinese.
It was a Lunar New Year celebration.
But you also had a picture of yourself with other women sheriffs. What was that? This was National Women's Sheriff or Virginia Women's Sheriff? What was it?
This was the National Sheriff's Association, and it was women sheriffs throughout the United States. So there was myself and Sheriff Arthur, who from Arlington County Sheriff's Office, and then we had other sheriffs that were from Dallas and from, I guess, Pennsylvania, Florida, and 2 other jurisdictions in Dallas.
So how many are there countywide? How many of there are you? Or countrywide, I'm sorry.
In the United States, there's approximately 40 women sheriffs.
Oh, that's not very many.
It's not, we're, I think 1% of the total is what I was told. So very small, but it seems as though we're growing, and people are realizing that women can do great in leadership positions in law enforcement.
Absolutely. Well, and hopefully you can sort of network with those folks, because you do have, fortunately, Beth Arthur is right next door, so that's a good thing.
It's a great thing.
Oh, there are a number of women sheriffs, if there are that few of you, who must feel sort of isolated out there in the country by themselves. But we have finished. I'm so glad that you were able to come and talk about your initiatives, and I look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much, Bettina, for having me.
Absolutely.